All right, guys. Welcome back to the podcast. Welcome back to Game and Compute. On this channel, we talk a lot about finances, side hustles, your money situations. I wanted to jump into a topic related to kind of my own personal life, what I've been kind of dealing with lately, as well as some friends of mine. A lot of us are kind of in the process of transitioning out of our current jobs into, if not a second career path, maybe a third career path. I have some friends that were in the military before and jumped into another type of work, and now we're jumping into other types of work. Most of my friends pretty much went to grad school, myself included. And, we got degrees based on the field that we wanted to work in. And a lot of the people I know are in clinical, in psych, or through social work, they're doing clinical work or some form of like case management and things like this. A lot of people I know got licensed during this year, 2022, and went from getting paid nearly maybe 20-ish something an hour, or even a little less, like $18, $19 an hour. Thank you, Southern California, for paying your county mental health workers so well. I mean, in this economy, you cannot really survive off of that if you have like student loans and bills and stuff. And that's like before taxes, like 18, 19, 20, 21 or so dollars before taxes in California. That's just not gonna work. Unless you have a bunch of roommates, or you have a spouse or a partner, or live with family or something, you can't even really afford your own spot. So that already becomes a stressor, because a lot of us don't really want to be sharing with people. It's just a hassle a lot of the times. We deal with people all day, and then a lot of the times it can be hard with the boundaries with housemates, roommates, who want to, use the fact that you have good social skills and a caring, compassionate personality, and they kind of want to unload on you a lot, and then they get a little upset when you don't want to talk to them, and it's like, dude, like that's not what this is. I just like live here, but it can be a little overwhelming and kind of hard to kind of navigate those kind of boundaries. Or just people in general having like so much of like stigma and hatred towards the mental health field anyways. Like there's a little bit of a pocket of people who just don't understand it. So it can be a little challenging to live with people, even if they're good roommates. I mean, I've had some good roommates, but then some of their family members that I had to deal with, or like I'm not even going to get into all the roommates, you guys. I feel like I've vented on here about all the roommate trauma, that could possibly be experienced. Like, I've probably experienced everything short of somebody like physically, like aggressively, like approaching me, like all the verbal weird stuff that could possibly be happening. I've experienced that, and none of it was warranted. It was just people just popping off, just not able to manage themselves. And it's like, I'm just sick of that kind of thing. Like, it's like, we deal with hard enough situations all day anyways. But for me, it's kind of coming towards, a conclusion that I'm not too interested in sticking around in the mental health field, especially on the clinical end. I mean, I love it. I mean, I'm passionate about a lot of the help that we give people, a lot of the support, knowing about the resources. But, there's a part of it that's just, like, so draining. I mean, I've been doing this for, this is, year 6. I think in December it's going to be 7 years. I have to do the actual math. I've honestly lost track. I don't really even, keep up track of, what I'm actually doing. How many years and stuff. And then, Uh, let's see. There's also, you know, that, um, if you're not licensed, it doesn't pay too well. Um, and then depending on the site, there's not a lot of like room for like upward mobility as far as like your job options and getting paid more. Like the sites I've worked at, they're literally contracted. Like your position is contracted for. So for example, the previous site I worked at, I was making $18 an hour. If I wanted to make more, that wasn't possible. Like there were times when we made more because we were so whelmed with paperwork and work we couldn't keep up with, that they did a lot of overtime at one point in time, where we were doing like a lot of hours of overtime during the week and on weekends. And then that got stricter because of the budgets and stuff. And so then they started like, I mean, they would always approve it and stuff before, but like then they started kind of saying, okay, like instead of taking the overtime, like see what you can do during the work week, where, it got to a point where we were like canceling client sessions. They would prefer us to cancel our therapy groups or certain client sessions to catch up on paperwork. So it's like it almost became like overly stressful to be behind, because then you feel like you're like disappointing your clients. And it's one thing when it's like on an occasion, but it did get to a point where the client started kind of speaking up to management about it, and it became a problem where it's like, people noticed that they had to say that they were in crisis just so they would get seen, or that they've got like some severity of situation happening just so they could make sure that their appointment wasn't going to get canceled so the staff could finish paperwork, because they weren't wanting us to do overtime because it was costing the companies more money. And having a job where your position's budgeted for, that's cool if you're getting like a new contract every year, every 2 years. But I was there like maybe 5 years with no contract change. And there were people that were there before me. There are people who were there after me. The contract has not changed up until July of this year, 2022. It barely changed during last month. And so if you think about that, making $18 an hour, not even considering inflation. And because I was there so long, I was making less money than everyone else, because some people were making like $19, $19.50. I remember somebody mentioning, like it would be nice if leads were getting paid at least $20. And I was like, dude, like that's nuts to me, that like you can be a lead and not even being paid $20 an hour. And then when you would want to raise, like if you were on point with everything, and then like they had to do a whole process of it, it was like basically you had to beg and beg and beg. You wouldn't even get like 50 cents more. I don't know anybody who got an extra 50 cents. So that was always a struggle. Basically, the way to get better pay would be just wait till a different site gets a new contract within the company, and then switch to that site, because the work pays more. But every environment's different. It's usually pretty fast paced anyways, usually a lot of severity. If you think about, if you know what, it's not the high level of like a crisis center or a hospital, but it's like right underneath that level. So we had people that were pretty much in need of routine services, because if they didn't get those services, they were at risk of having relapse of symptoms, or maybe if people weren't checking in on the meds very regularly, like they had pervasive mental illness in a way that like it was very, very likely that a lot of these people were going to be long-term or lifelong on medications or needing medications. And to be able to function. A lot of people were on disability, had been in the mental health care system, getting services for years, since maybe their teen years, and a lot of them may have been in their 40s, 50s. And so that was very common. The population we were serving there had very severe issues, and a lot of the times the way they would qualify to get services is because they had had a recent hospitalization or crisis house stay, and they required that level of care. So it was almost like a walk-in outpatient crisis center where there were people enrolled, and then people could walk in to get assigned to therapy and like connect to the services and everything. And some people needed case management where they'd have to have a staff come out to them because either they didn't have the transportation or like, there were severity of symptoms to a point where they needed someone to be like hands-on, like going to, different buildings with them, driving them to the buildings to fill out paperwork for housing and following up with all these different providers and whatnot. And it's just really easy to get compassion fatigue from those types of job sites. And I think the work is very beneficial. I love working with the populations I've worked with, the ones I currently work with. I find a lot of value in the work. It's just, once the Rona kind of started coming through full force, our jobs kind of changed a lot, and a lot of it became just like there's no services. Like there was a point where there were literally no services for therapy that were like immediate, and there was a point during, some of the hardest times in during the Rona where we weren't even able to connect people to what they needed because it didn't really exist. Certain things like I remember like hospitals and crisis centers, for example, because they're inpatient, a lot of times we couldn't get people in when they would call in a crisis and they needed that support right away, right that day. Any other time in the past, we would have been able to just, talk to the staff, at least get like a general idea of when they could get in. But they were requiring people to have a negative COVID result test for them to be able to qualify to get in. So if someone's in a crisis today, having suicidal thoughts today, they'd have to wait maybe, I think at that time it was like 2 or 3 days because they didn't have those like rapid home tests yet. And so, you'd have to go to a doctor and get there and wait in the line and get the test. And then that was at the time when the doctors were still taking a couple days to send you back the results. And so, I was like, I've never seen anything like this where you can't even get into a hospital the same day. Now that period of time didn't last very, very long, but it did it did exist. And I was like, how is this even like possible? And I understand it too. Like, of course, at that point, not everybody was vaccinated. Not everybody I think there were requirements at some point, or maybe there was a conversation surrounding like people needed to be vaccinated to be able to qualify to get in. I don't remember fully clearly if that was like a necessity, but they really were pushing the vaccines and pushing that, you have to show your COVID results and all these kind of things. And then people needing work had the same issue that they had to be vaccinated to work. So we had clients that were maybe homeless or at risk of homelessness and needing work right away, but they had to prioritize getting these tests. And if you think about people who don't really have the money for transportation and they're trying to run all over town getting these COVID tests and like wasting their time and energy to like get vaccinated, like it wasn't like it was easy just to get a vaccine. Just stuff like that where it's like, and then, we had a period of time too where a lot of people were using those COVID money programs to pay their rent, and then those went away. I think up until March of 2022, I believe they were available. So we had a whole like March, April, May, June, and then finally in July, a program rolled out that if you were 2 months late for rent, you could qualify to use that service. And that service was telling me that, there's literally two people working for that site. It was in North County in San Diego, like Oceanside or somewhere that wasn't even like easy to get to if you don't have a car. And it was like a process where you have to call them, make an appointment, but they didn't always pick up the phone. And then you'd have to make an appointment to get the paperwork and then take the paperwork to your landlord. And your landlord had to sign these agreements and stuff and show how much money was due. And then the paperwork would go back to the staff. I don't know anyone who's completed that process, but I know people who needed the service, but because they were behind on the rent, unfortunately, and it's like they couldn't pay their rent, and then there was no money for people to pay their rent, and it was just like, and so a lot of insurance companies are having to get these enhanced, referrals, that are now rolling out, but it's taken a year or maybe almost 2 years at this point for there to be programs that people can use that actually are helpful. And I think it's just it really has burned me out to not have the ability to really be able to adequately help people. Like, I've never had a time period like this where it's like we're so limited on everything we can do, and the need is so great of the people who need so much services, and we can't even really do anything until there's a program that exists for us to connect them to. And then, like, every time we need to connect somebody to a service, it's like jumping through hoops. Like I said, that program that helps you pay for your rent, it took them like a couple weeks for them to call me back because they were getting like 200 calls a day or something, and it took them a while to call me back because there was one person returning the phone calls. And so I was like, oh my goodness, like, is that how these sites are, And not even to mention all the situations of these weird shady sites that were popping up, taking government money and like kicking people out like onto the streets and stuff, and like acting like they were like some kind of homeless support, and then they ended up being like not really good, and not really taking good care of the homeless populations, and then sending them all to these weird shelters that were just like tents popped up all over in the city. And then it's just like, man, like, I've never seen anything like this. And you don't hear about any of this stuff like in the news. Like, I don't really follow the news, but it's like you would think that there would be some awareness that this is going on. Like, I know we all see it with our own eyes. Like, we see in cities and different places how the landscape has changed with people living in tents in different places, or how hard it might be to get certain appointments depending on your insurance, how often the doctors aren't available, how often certain nurses aren't available, how often sites just don't call you back, how often sometimes you call sites and you just can't get through. Like, these types of things weren't happening back in like 2019. And it's definitely hard to be, working in mental health, dealing with a low pay rate. If you're licensed, you're probably getting close to 60 to 80 something K a year, which is decent. If you're in San Diego, that's kind of like a more decent range to be making. But a lot of people who aren't licensed, they're still making close to like 50K, which isn't really a lot, considering that to get an average apartment, $1,500 for like a studio, closer to 2,000, between 1,500 and like 1,800. Like, you're not really finding too much lower than that rate. And the 50K is before taxes, before deductions, before you save your money, before you contribute to your retirement. It's before all your bills, before everything. So it just doesn't add up anymore, guys. And I don't know, I'm kind of on my way pretty much out, but like a slow exit. I'm not like rushing out the door. I'm kind of in progress of looking into options, still trying to figure out what I'm trying to get up to, because I wasn't really planning on necessarily dipping out of this field. That wasn't really my game plan, but I already did know. I was kind of aware of how draining things do get, and I was pretty aware of it. And I was a little skeptical even from the beginning of how long I could really sustain, doing this kind of work. I didn't fully, know if I would stay in this field forever. At the moment, it's not really looking like something I really want to do. It just doesn't add up fully for me. It's just not, the amount of stress and drain in my life and dealing with severity of issues on a regular basis for low pay and not even being able to kind of like live where I want or do what I want or pay the bills the way I want or like, make different decisions the way that I want to. It's just like, what am I getting in return for all of this? It kind of isn't. I thought about other people. I've thought about others. I've cared for others, but then I also have to care for myself. And I do have to realize that, I only get my one life too, as far as I know. And I don't want to burn out so early. I'm not even 40 years old yet, and I don't want to be like not wanting to work, or anything like that. And to top it off, I did have COVID for like a week out of work. And like, so I did kind of have to waste like a week of, at least I was getting paid, but it's like I did have to waste a week of time off just to be able to kind of like keep up, make sure that I'm not getting sicker and getting better and stuff like that. And it's just kind of my experience. I mean, I don't discourage people from going into the field. Like I have a friend, like I was mentioning, who's about to go into the field while I'm like trying to dip out of it. But, I think people don't really notice that it's not an easy field to work in. I mean, it can be a great experience. I've made some really close friends, have really great colleagues, coworkers. There are a couple management types that didn't really care much for, who I could tell kind of like a little bit had it in for me or just didn't understand how to like be around me and kind of had like maybe low opinions of me for whatever reason that may be. But that wasn't the general kind of way. I kind of noticed kind of a personality trend with certain types of people. They don't really get along very well with like kind of passive types. They kind of take it as like a weakness. If you're like a vulnerable person and you're kind of more like authentic with things, they kind of take that as like, oh, like you're not, a good worker, or you're not, you can easily be like stepped on and I can intimidate you kind of thing. Like I've had a couple, like one supervisor that was like that in my first practicum, and then currently there's somebody that I still, on a very rare occasions, maybe once a year, have to interact with somebody who's like that. So, but it's not like so often that it's like daily. Like there was like maybe 8 to 10 months with that first person, and this person I've known them for like years. Like they like me enough that they've hired me, but like they've also really totally gaslighted me about so many things that I'm just kind of like, I don't even need to like be involved with this person. But it's kind of like I'm using them for the job that they're giving me, and they're using me for, we make them money. So that's just kind of how it is. Whatever at this point when it comes to that kind of stuff. But yeah, that's kind of mostly what I have to say. It's yeah, just that's my recent update. But thanks for listening.